In this video, I'll show you how to make quarter square triangles using 5-inch squares. First, by making 2 half square triangle units, then using them to create quarter square triangle blocks. First, draw a diagonal line on the back of your print fabrics. I like to do this in batches, lining multiple squares up with a line on my mat and drawing a line on them in one motion. Pair half of your print squares up with your low volume squares and half of them with your background squares. Sew a scant 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the drawn line. Now cut them apart on the drawn line. Again, I like to do this in batches because it saves so much time. You do this by lining the corners of the squares up with the cutting lines on your mat, and then you cut them apart in one motion. When I line up multiple blocks on my mat, I usually overlap each square by half. That way I'm cutting through a max of about 4 layers of fabric at one time, which keeps my cuts accurate. Now we press. Set your iron on top of your block first while it's closed to set your seam, then open the block and press the seam toward the print fabric. Now you have your half square triangles. I have some of my sets here, and now I'm going to mark the back of just one of my half square triangles, because you see I have one that has a low volume and one that has a white. So it doesn't matter which one you do, you just want to be consistent. And when you go to mark the diagonal line, you don't want to run into that seam allowance. So I always have the seam allowance pushing down so that when I mark it with my pen, it doesn't pull on the seam allowance. Now that you have your 2 pieces, you're going to want to get these 2 seam allowances pushed up right next to each other. So since one is pressed towards the yellow here and one is pressed towards the yellow there, they should kind of butt together very nicely. So I only worry about this side kind of being lined up. Remember, we're going to trim this. So I don't worry about looking at the whole square. I just look at these 2 sides. I kind of feel for my seam. I can tell that it's butted up nice. You can always double check if you want to make sure those 2 seams line up really good. And then I'm going to pin it. But when you go to sew this, now you're going to do the opposite of when you drew the line, and you actually want your seam pressing forward, because when your machine comes down, it's going to push that seam into the one on the back, versus if you sew this way, the drag of your machine might pull it away from your other seam, and then you'll have a gap. So you're going to make sure that these are nice and tight to each other. And then I put a pin across the seam allowance. I only worry about this one, right? Because this seam allowance is facing down, so it doesn't matter. It's not like your machine's gonna catch it. So I pin it right there, and then I'm gonna go sew. Now I'm gonna sew 2 of them together that do not have a marked line. Start there. And then you're gonna look right down here, and I like the tip of my square to be right on the inside of that black line. Now you flip it around and you sew down the other side. If I'm not using a marked line, I just make sure that the edge of my foot goes down right over the tip of my square. And I take about 2 to 3 stitches, and then I line the bottom of this corner. Okay, one of these does not have a drawn line and one does, but this is how I'll line it up on the mat. I'll line the tip of that square up with a line, and I kind of hold my finger down and I pivot to make sure the tip of this one is on the line. And then when I do this one, I make sure that my seam right there is lined up with the seam here, and that this tip is on the line. I follow the lines on my cutting mat, cut them apart, and now you have quarter square triangles, and one of them has the low volume and one of them has the white on each one of these. Now before you go to press these, we are going to do something called swirl our center seams. But you're going to look at the stitches on your triangle. There are about 2 stitches before my seam line right here. So I'm going to I unpick that second stitch. You don't have to unpick them both because then it will come right apart when you go to iron it. Do you see how that just flips? This seam is going to go up and this seam is going to go down. I'll do one more to show you. So you have 2 stitches about before your seam line there. So I just unpick, this one almost looks like 3, but I just unpicked that bottom stitch because this one had 3. I feel like I have to do both. I open it up and then you're going to split your seam and see how it just swirls right there. And then this seam is going to go down, this seam is going to go up. To press these, I think it's easier rather than trying to press both in one direction. It's really easy then to get your fabrics to where they're not pulled all the way back. I just prefer to set my seam, then I press it one direction. So I usually press up, which is away from me. Just set it there for a minute. And then when you flip it over, already one of them is going the correct direction. So you just have to open this up and press it up. Now the way I could tell which goes which is, see how this seam is laying on top of this seam? So this is going to be the seam that goes up. You're going to have right and left that goes up depending on which hourglass block it is. And then you can just kind of double check that everything's good. I'd be careful not to distort it and push and pull too much just because these are all bias edges. So I just kind of set it and then I'm going to set it to the side to cool. We'll do one more. And I'm going to set my seam. Then I'm going to press it up. So I just let the iron sit there for a minute. Flip it over, and then on this one, this right seam is on top, so it's gonna go up. And then I don't have to worry about the left seam because it's already pressed and nicely in place. So I'm just gonna set that there, flip it over, make sure everything looks good. I don't know, I just think it lays flatter when you do it from the front also. And then when you let it cool for a second, it'll be nice and flat. Okay, now we need to trim these square. These are already trimmed, but these need to be trimmed. So I like to use a smaller rotating cutting mat and just a regular like Creative Grids square ruler, or you can use this Tucker trimmer, which works really nicely because not only does it have the diagonal lines, but it also has the lines going this direction. You were to use your Tucker trimmer. It's really handy because you're gonna pay attention to this diagonal line lining up with the diagonal there, as well as there will be a diagonal line for this. And what this line does is it ensures that you don't trim, that this doesn't come too far off to where you're trimming too much off one side. This is kind of a check for you. So first you make sure this diagonal line lines up, and then you make sure this diagonal line lines up, and then you're never gonna trim too much off your block. So I guess that would be probably the biggest benefit to using the Tucker trimmer. The other one works just fine. This is just probably a tiny bit faster because you don't have to pay as close attention to those lines as you do just this diagonal line and that diagonal line. You get them both lined up and then you know you're good to go. So if you like buying rulers, this would be a great one to have. I do think it's a little bit faster than just using like a regular square ruler. And there you have it. All of these cute little hourglass blocks that you're gonna lay out into a block. And remember, the low volumes are gonna go onto the inside, just like